I took a woman who I met while she was singing praises to him in Germany, and I butchered that woman for 30 years. I feel shame saying it, but I thank him because he restores, he forgives, and I walk in that forgiveness. You know, I grew up in the South Bronx. I have no recollection of high school at all, none. My name, Nick Novello, was not originally my name. My name was Pagan. My family practiced sorcery and necromancy. I remember one story that my dad had bought, a two-story facility in the Bronx for, I think it was $24,000. Some years later, he could sell it for $65,000, retire, and go back to Puerto Rico. But he had a problem with the tenants downstairs. They didn't want to move. They didn't want the lease broken because they had a good deal. So my dad went to a woman by the name of Catalina, and he told me this story while we were still speaking because my dad died and we were estranged. But he told me he was given a small vial, instructions on how to use that vial, and told that if he did not use the vial correctly, he would himself die. So obviously he used it correctly because these people, when they came home, opened the door and went into the apartment. They fled, didn't come back for a second car, did not come back for clothing, furniture. So years later, as an adult, I cajoled him in telling me what had happened. And he said that when the vial hit the wall, throw it, shut the door, and get out before it hits. Because when it hits, there'll be demonic apparitions. And that's what drove those people out. And that was the environment and the culture I grew up in. You know, I thank the Lord that I forgive my dad today for the scars I have. He would beat me with metal. My mom died when I was 10. I didn't know what it was to be loved. I thought I had no need of love. The first person who ever told me she loved me, my wife of 41 years. And my brothers, I butchered that relationship for 30. December 30th, 2010, I was in my living room. I had just got back from going to the FBI and talking about police corruption specific to the Dallas Police Department. Interestingly, I was told by a woman some years later that it was a heroic thing to do, and I remember saying it wasn't heroic. I was full of hate. Hate drove me. But all the while, I thought there was something about me that God still loved in the flesh, something about me that was different. And so I walked that way, always turning my back on him, always giving him cheap intellectual assent. That day, I was in my living room, and I thought this would never come to me, but it did. I suddenly had an epiphany that my whole life had come to an end, that everything I ever did was in futility and vanity. My wife was in her bedroom. We hadn't talked for at least a week. My wife had been clinically dead twice. The first time that my wife had brain surgery, and the doctor said she may not make it. I couldn't pray. I laid on the floor, Methodist Hospital. I began to weep, and I heard his voice, repent, and I'll restore your wife. I cried and I repented. She came out of surgery, an extensive brain surgery, and the doctor said, I don't understand it, but she's awake, she's asking for you. And then I went right back to being Nick, right back to doing everything I do, right back to pleasing myself. And so I fast forward to December 30th, 2010. I'm in my living room. I remember saying, Lord, take her home. She's that miserable. Take her home. I'm a man. I have things I have to do. I'm going to keep fighting this fight, and I don't care what it costs me. And then suddenly, as real as wearing a jacket, I felt like I wanted to kill myself. I looked at my gun. I began to really want to reach for it and take it. And at that point in time, the Lord began to work in me. And I can only tell you, I'm so grateful to him. But for 3 months, I tasted the essence of hell. For 3 months, the Lord told me, this is eternity without me. This is what your life will be without me. I walked the streets. Excuse me. I would walk the streets and weep at 2 and 3 in the morning, no rest. I ate when I was starving. I slept when I passed out. And I sought the Lord, and I wept. I began to go to church with her, and I'd sit there holding a Bible, stupefied. No reference points for where I was, but I knew he had told me, I have you, but this will be your eternity without me. Now I know what he was showing me, because in Greek, the word judgment is krisis. It means principally separation. And so I had been spiritually allowed to taste what that would be like without him. It's absolutely chilling, and hell is so real. And so I go through this for 3 months, being broken daily, all the hubris, all the pomposity gone. I have nothing to hold on to. And my wife is loathing me, and I recall her saying, I know he's got you, but I can't forgive you right now. 3 decades she endured all the things I did, and she stayed faithful in spite of that. 3 decades. And I recall, oh, how well I recall, 3 months go by, I'm sitting in church with her, and I'm broken. I'm so broken. I'm so grateful to him. But I'm not delivered yet. But I recall closing my eyes and beginning to weep. And I said, Lord, I'm done. If you'll deliver me, if you'll help me and save me. And my brothers, no sooner than I recall saying that, I felt him deliver me. I felt him embrace me. The weight came off of me. I knew I was delivered. I knew I was saved. I'd never read the scriptures, didn't care to be around Christian men. I gave the Lord cheap lip service. I gave him mere intellectual assent, but I wouldn't give him my heart. And so after he delivered me, I really became attentive to what he would have me do. And the first thing was open my Bible. And from that day to this day, that's all I do. I don't watch TV. I don't judge anyone who does. That's fine. But I'm trying to catch up a little bit. So I open the Bible. I look at the ancient documents. I look at the words, word for word, in the transliterations for Hebrew and Greek. But after 4 years of that, it was fantastic. But I woke up and I said, Lord, I love doing this, but why, Lord? Why? So some days passed, and then he woke me up. And I remember standing up to hear, and I heard it in my voice and my heart. I heard it in my heart. You're going to go to prison, and you're going to tell those men that I love them, and you're going to tell them that you love them, and you're going to be very truthful and open and honest. And so the next day I go to work, and Denny James, who's an ex-con who loves the Lord, delivered from drugs, he says to me, you ever think of going to prison? Well, of course, I jumped on that opportunity. And so two years now, I've been in the ministry, and I last spoke in McKinney briefly to the brothers. Subsequent to that, I've been allowed to become a dorm pastor at Hutchins, which for me is such a privilege. I really can't believe that I can go into the prisons every day now, and I try to go in as often as possible. I sit with men, and we're real with each other. I have to tell you, it keeps me real and grounded. But before I speak the gospel of Christ to the men, I do speak the doctrine of total depravity, total depravity. I know that there's nothing good that dwells in my flesh. Paul says that in Romans 7:18, and Philippians 3:3 says, or 3:13, he says, have no confidence in the flesh, none. So I'm very mindful of that. But it took me a long while to get past what I'd done to my wife. And then the Lord showed me that my testimony, my life with him began on the cross. When Paul says in Romans 6:6, know this, that your old man was crucified with him. That became so real to me. He wants us to know that so deeply that the word know there And 6'6" is a Jewish word, genosko, and it's a Jewish idiom for intimacy between a man and a woman. That's how intimate Paul wants you to know you went to the cross with him. And then other scriptures were made real in my life, and I understood everything God hated about me and everything God hates about you went to the cross with Christ and was nailed to that cross. And so we walk today as free men before him. That's why I know James says, so speak you and do you as those who will be judged by the law of liberty. And that word liberty means freeborn, unencumbered. We do before the Lord because we love him. It's something that for me, I'm mindful of Paris Reedhead, who's been with the Lord 20 years. And as he tells it, he says, I went to Africa to improve upon the justice of God. He had that hubris and he admits to it. He said he got to Africa and he found that they knew more about the gospel than he did. They had simply chosen to live in their sin. And that night in his hotel room, he was angry with God, very angry with God. And so he wrestled with God. And as Paris tells it, in the still hours, he heard the Lord speaking to his heart. And he said, I didn't send you to Africa for them. I did not send you to Africa for you. Don't I deserve the fruit of my suffering? And so I came to the place where I understood I worship Jesus not so much to avoid hell. Of course we all do. But Jesus alone is worthy. He alone is worthy. It's all privilege. I think to myself, when I say, Lord, take me today and use me, I live day by day. I refuse to do otherwise. Am I giving him something? A 64-year-old man who's chemically worth a couple of dollars. I have nothing to hold on to. People say you sound like a man with no self-esteem. I have no self-esteem. Christ is my confidence. He's my self-esteem. He opens the doors. I simply go and speak the gospel of Christ. So as I speak in public and everywhere else now, I spoke with Rodney Anderson, the state rep, yesterday, and he's asking questions about what we need to do to reform the policing function in America. And I will tell you, we're so far past the point of viable damage control, we have no reference points for where we are in our culture today. We know that we're rushing towards a conclusion, and the solution I speak to is Christ and him crucified. That's all there is. I know that we have no other life. I know that he's the heartbeat in my chest. He's the breath that I draw. I know that. I wouldn't have said it 7 years ago. But my brothers, I'm going to tell you, you know that you are the redeemed of the Lord. You're very dear to him. Very dear. He loves you so much. And those of you here, I know, that have given yourselves over to ministry, I would just exhort you and say, keep pushing, keep prodding, keep chasing him. If you would have asked me years ago, do I fast? Never. I'm a red meat eater. But I felt the Lord tell me, you need to start fasting. And so when you fast, the scriptures become so real. When you fast, his presence in your life is palpable. When you fast and give yourself over to prayer, it all becomes about him, because it is all him in the end. You know, the scriptures tell us that he is your hope of glory. He's the mystery that resides within you. And that word hope has no context other than him. El peace, a joyful expectation of him who promised. And so we labor on. We're privileged to be in his vineyards. You know, I will tell you, I was in jail some months ago, and there was a man there about my age, but he looked 75, Randy. And we're laughing as Randy speaks. He's so discombobulated because of a life given to drugs. When Randy speaks and he says, my daddy died 8 or 9 months ago, and so the table, the gathering becomes a little somber. And then Randy says, some months later, my only son took his life. And then Randy becomes very emotional, very quiet though. And then he says, 2 months ago, my wife died of a broken heart. And the only thing you can do is be real with that man and weep with him, hold him, and tell him about Jesus. because in the end, there's absolutely nothing there but Jesus. And so I stand here this morning, and I'm so privileged because the Lord told me in my heart, I'm going to allow you into my vineyards to speak to my people. I feel like the wealthiest man on the face of the earth today. I can want for nothing more. I'm allowed to go into the prisons, and everywhere I go in public in uniform, I speak. A lot of what I say alienates people. One of the things I speak to is that in our nihilistic culture, the young people can't articulate that, but they embody it. The problem is in policing in America, those same nihilistic tendencies have become part and parcel of how we do policing in America. So we're very quick to take police here and juxtapose the criminal element and think it's a clean scenario when it's not. Last October, Terrence Cunningham, the chief of the International Police Chiefs Association, during a large gathering, made an interesting statement. Really, it amounted to a mea culpa when he said, we, police in America, have done some unspeakable things because of some very heinous laws on the books. What an admission. But the problem now comes in that it served only as a cathartic moment. We're not reforming. We're not having conversations. We don't sit and say to a cop, why are you doing this? Because to ask is to be anti-police. I speak to Black Lives Matter people, and I say, why are you doing that? I'm a racist. So we use labels now in place of conversations. If we are not defining our problems, there'll certainly be no solutions. But I will say this, I know in my spirit, and I think many of you also know, we're living, literally living Matthew 24. Nation shall rise against nation. That word nation in the Greek ethnos, the root word for ethnicities. White being played against black, black against white. All races coming together, very factionalized as they come together. Lots of hatred, lots of anger. I don't know what's happening in Dallas, Texas, but I know that my police department is 1,200 officers short. We have deliberately been denuded. We cannot answer calls, and yet what's astounding to me, and this is in our culture, not just in Dallas, we continue to disseminate information that's absolutely false. We've got your back, you're safe, and every document I have shows we're doing cleanup work. We have no real-time police response in Dallas. And so I make some calls. I start looking at New York, Cleveland, San Francisco, same dynamic. We're going to have a police state probably much sooner than later. We're rushing towards that monolith. We in this country have a window open for the proclamation of the gospel. How long we're going to have that window, I don't know. But I daily wake up and feel this is the only day I have. This is the only moment I have. Let me proclaim the gospel in every situation, in every setting. That's the imperative. I will share a quick story with you because I went to a gathering and it was that Brett may have been there because I think it was my first gathering, and it was. And Brent may have been there. But I sat quietly and I listened to these men who were very well off, very influential, and I sat quietly. And in the aftermath, I recall one guy, maybe 70-ish, he asked me a question. He said, Nick, you sat there quiet, you said nothing for 3.5 hours. What do you make of what you heard? And so I recall very specifically saying, you asked me, so I'll tell you. 4 Jewish words come to mind, 4 nouns. But I'll start by telling you the word vanity in English means nothing other than its association with narcissism. But you asked me, so I'm going to tell you, as you speak to me, the first word is avin. You're self-seeking. You're looking to authenticate your life before God. And maybe you don't even acknowledge God, but you're looking for self-worth. When you recognize it won't come, not in your life, the second word kicks in, shav. You begin to embrace false personas and lies about self so you can feel some sense of achievement or authentication. The last words, the 2 words are chilling, because Isaiah uses the word tohu, wilderness, chaos, and nothingness within the context of havel, vapor breath. So in your case, you look in the mirror, you've got money, you're an older man, you've done nothing with your life. You have very little life left. And so for me, the only reason we're here today, and many of you men, the bulk, have seen the cross. You're here for that reason, to be embraced by Christ. And then 2 Corinthians 4:11, those of us who live are daily delivered to death, that the life of Christ might be made manifest in us. That's the only reason we're here. And I submit to you, there are many here that, wow, I'm in awe, I really am, because I've heard some stories already. I go, wow, man, this guy really labors for the Lord. This guy really loves the Lord. I would say this to my brothers, know this, he loves you so much. And if you have a question about that, know in Galatians 1:21, where Paul says, those of you who are sometimes alienated and enemies in your mind, and the word alienated, estranged from him. Please know this. Now has he reconciled. If you're not where you want to be, all you need to say is, Father God, in Jesus' name, put me where you want me to be, and let me say with Paul, what would you have me do? How would you have me live my life to your glory? Allow me into your vineyards that I might proclaim this amazing Christ who loves so much. You know, I can't tell you the privilege I feel standing here. I still go home and my wife is still guarded. She'll look at me now, and I hadn't heard it in 30 years, but she'll say, I love you, but I can still see her guarded. My brothers, were it not for Christ and the work of mercy and grace in my life, I don't know that I could live with that. I took a woman who I met while she was singing praises to him in Germany, and I butchered that woman for 30 years. I feel shame saying it. But I thank him because he restores, he forgives, and I walk in that forgiveness. But I daily know I walk as a broken man. I have nothing to commend myself with to any man. But the scriptures say he loved us so much that he commends himself to us while we were yet sinners. And that word commends there, he joined himself to us while we were yet sinners. And so I'm so grateful to him. You know, Johnny Mack reached out to me a few weeks ago, and I remember Johnny Mack when he worked with the department in the 80s. I remember him to be a good man, a hardworking officer. But when he reached out to me and immediately shared his love of Christ, his love for the cross of Christ. You know, I would say today in our country, especially in our country, we were in absolute rebellion before a holy God. Absolute rebellion. We know that this holy God's only solution for sin was death. That's how much he hates it. I want to share one thing and then I'll be done, but it took me so long. I wouldn't say why, Lord, but I just anguish and weep over my wife. I couldn't forgive myself. I just couldn't. And then the Lord showed me one word in the Greek, how it's used twice in the New Testament, how it applied to me. And the word is marismos. It's a noun. It's used in Hebrews 2:4 as the word gifts. And it's used in Hebrews 4:12 as the word asunder. And the Lord showed me when you died on the cross with me, everything that Father hates about you was nailed to the cross. I was so grateful to be able to bow my knee and know that I was accepted as a son in Christ, by and through Christ. It's all about Christ. That's the mistake the modern church makes. We can do these things and we can pay him lip service. 1 Peter 2:7, building the church but rejecting the cornerstone. And so we have an intellectually assenting church in America. But Paul says in Romans 8:9, if the very spirit of Christ does not indwell one, he has nothing to do with you. And so I thank you for the opportunity and privilege of being here. You know, when the Lord can take somebody like me who, I mean, you talk about a mess. And yet he said, I chose you in John 15. You didn't choose me, I chose you. And I'm going to use you. And that's all of us in this room. He loves you so much. I would just encourage you, if you don't fast, I never did, but the Lord showed me, you're going to fast more than you eat now. And I can do it because of him. It's him that does it in me. And as that happens, you do walk into prisons. I thank God I walk into the prison by myself and go into the back by myself and speak to hundreds of men. They know I'm a cop. I give them my phone number. When they get out, we meet. We have coffee. We break bread. They are my brethren in Christ. That I know. All right, thank you so much for your time this morning.